village by the sea. Fishing boats, cottages and a gorgeous view. A perfect place to escape from a busy world. But look closer and there's another story. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist I want to explore the places where we live, to see how they've changed and hopefully dig up the odd surprise about their past. Wow, what a view! Our coastal villages are often seen as remote outposts, places of retreat and relaxation. But they've been on the front line of history, from the arrival of Christianity to desperate battles with neighbours and nature, from slave trading to the birth of modern tourism. During the Middle Ages, the Suffolk village of Walberswick fought a bloody battle with its neighbour, Dunwich, to become one of the most important ports on the east coast, trading as far afield as Iceland. But in the end, the villagers were no match for fire, political turmoil, and the might of the sea. Walberswick lies on the estuary of the River Blythe in Suffolk. About 400 people live here, and with its village green and pretty cottages, it's popular with holiday makers. You can't fail to notice the church with its much larger ruin, and the village is full of desirable properties, many of them homes to actors, writers and celebrities. But Walberswick hasn't always been an affluent bolt hole. In fact, it hasn't always been on this site. And at first glance, there are few clues to a past that lurched from prosperity to poverty over several centuries. It's a place where nothing stays the same for long. The shingle banks along the coast are constantly reshaped by rising sea levels, tides and storms. I love the haphazard make do and mend character of the buildings down here on the quay. They've used materials salvaged from here, there and everywhere, and they've adapted from fishermen's huts and net lofts into holiday accommodation. They're on pedestals, hedging their bets against the rising tides. It's a reminder that what the sea gives, the sea can take away. And here in Walberswick, it certainly has taken a lot away. The original village and its port have disappeared, but there is a clue to tell us where they were. Half a mile away from today's village, there's a wooded track leading to the marshes. Just wandering down this wonderful old green lane, and I say old because there are traces that it's actually quite an ancient thoroughfare. It's sunken below the level of the fields, cut into the slope, worn away by centuries of hooves and feet tramping down here. Now these lanes could be quite major thoroughfares in medieval times, and they always led to somewhere significant. Philip Kett was born and brought up in Walberswick. He's researched the importance of this medieval track called Stocks Lane.
Well, this lane used to be one of the main highways down to the quay and the stocks.
Not stocks as in put felons in there and throw fruit and vegetables.
Oh, no, shipbuilding stocks.
Oh. These are timbers to help support the frame of a ship while it's being built.
Yeah, that's right. And slopes so they would drift down into the river on their own.
If the lost village was here, it's likely there would have been a church as well. With maps and a bit of local knowledge, Philip thinks he's worked out where it was. So where's the old church?
On here, there.
Yeah, OK. So we're standing almost right in front of it.
Yeah, right against it.
What,
just
so
over here?
Oh, right, OK.
Just
what, between us and where those bushes are?
Yeah, about 100 yards out.
Yeah. It may look like an empty field, but Philip has done some archaeological detective work. Have you found any evidence?
Well, yes, we've found bits of crockery and And these stones found on the field. Local stone off the beach has been used for building. They've still got the mortar attached to them.
Yeah. That's the clincher, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think as an archaeologist, you know you're looking for something that doesn't belong. So someone's had to bring them up here. Why have they brought them up? Well, it's a building material, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're convincing me that this was effectively the centre of the village in those times.
Yeah. Down on the side of the river was the quays and the warehouses and the shipyard. Now that employed carpenters and men. The quay had warehouses, the trading ships that traded with Iceland and the Faroes, and these are called the Old Town Marshes.
So that implies that that we're a long way from the present village.
Yes.
They must be talking about a village down here. If you had stood on this spot back in the 13th century, the scene would have been quite different. It was a hive of activity with fishing, trading and shipbuilding. But Walberswick merchants had a problem. At that time, the river didn't go into the sea here as it does today. Instead, it flowed 2 miles further south, following the route of this now much narrower watercourse. It went out to the sea at Dunwich, which was then the main port on the East Anglian coast. Any ships belonging to Walberswick had to enter the harbour here at Dunwich and pay tolls for the privilege. Walberswick traders deeply resented this. It was the beginning of a trade war that would last for centuries. Walberswick merchants had no choice but to pay the tolls. Most of their money was from fish, which they took up the river for their main customer, the Priory at nearby Blythburgh. Danny Church operates the local ferry. She's taking me along the route the fishermen would have followed to the Priory. Danny, the river's really tranquil today and there's not much traffic about, but I assume it was very different in medieval times.
The channel would have been much more navigable than it is now. The riverbanks would have been much narrower. And there would have been locks as well to help the flow of the water go up and down. Because at low tide, you can't really get up here now.
If it's your lifeline, if it's what you rely on for trade, for wealth, to survive, yeah, of course you've got to keep it open. You can't just let nature take its course and hope for the best.
Yeah, and also they'd be hand digging it then as well, wouldn't they? Not they would like now with diggers and things. The men would be here hand digging the cuts. Would have been a lot of barks and sailing boats bringing cargo all the way from the continent. But the problem was people from Dunwich didn't want the Walberswickians coming in through their river.
They must have really, really wanted to get goods up here. It was important to get that coastal trade coming inland.
Oh, absolutely.
Tons of herring would have been unloaded at the quay. Today that's silted up and overgrown. And the ruined priory stands in what's now Chiara Saunders' garden.
I mean, if you just look at the size of the column there, it gives you a sense of the size of it.
So a large church, an important priory, and obviously one that needs resources.
Absolutely, and you know, you're living here and the closest resource is your river and your water, really.
That's the thing about monastic communities. They may have been few in number themselves, but they had a sort of support network around them. So it's an ideal location, really, because they're right on the river. They can get all the fish they need, and they eat a lot of fish.
Attached to the house, we've got a medieval chapel, and its history was related to Walberswick fishing and fishermen.
The community was so dependent on the Walberswick fishermen, ensuring their spiritual well-being must have been a priority.
So this is the chapel here.
Good grief. This is part of your house?
Yes, yes it is.
Oh,
very much so, yeah. The stories that we've heard, it was a place where the sailors were blessed before they went out to sea. Presumably looking after the sort of souls of the mariners was an important thing.
If your
Yeah.
livelihood, wealth, success depends on them, you're going to be very interested in their spiritual well-being, praying for their safety at sea. The health of this place depended on fishing, it depended on all their commercial activities. I can quite imagine that they prayed for the success of the fishing fleet and the health of the mariners. The ambitious traders of Walberswick were constantly frustrated by the tolls they had to pay to Dunwich for using the river. So they began imposing charges on Dunwich merchants using the road that passed through their land. This is all that remains of that road. All traffic that came through here was taxed. For example, a carriage carrying corn or fish whose wheels were shod with iron was charged twopence, and every horse a halfpenny. This enraged the men of Dunwich. It weakened their monopoly on trade in the area. According to some accounts, things got really nasty. A heavily manned ship made its way out to sea. There it attacked and sank a Walberswick boat. 16 crew members were killed. It was an act of wanton brutality. The men of Walberswick were shocked into submission. However, in the 14th century, it was the sea that decided the outcome of this war. Storms silted up Dunwich's harbour and the sea breached the shingle bank, this time next to Walberswick. The traders of Walberswick must have been over the moon. What a gift! They now had their own entrance to the sea. For most of the 15th century, Walberswick had the upper hand. Trade increased dramatically as her ships bypassed Dunwich. We have a fantastic account based on contemporary sources and compiled by Thomas Gardner in the 18th century. He was a local historian. And what these sources convey is that Walberswick was enjoying a considerable trade by sea for butter, cheese, bacon, corn, timber, coal, salt and fish, especially the latter. 13 boats were trading as far afield as Iceland, the Faroes and across the North Sea. Things got worse for Dunwich. The coast was eroding and the town was being washed away. Fearful that they would be next, Walberswick moved their entire village to higher ground. One of the early buildings from the new village still stands. This is the oldest house in the village. Apart from the church, the oldest building in the village. It was reclad in this wonderful soft red Suffolk brick in the 18th century. But around the corner, there's an indication of something even older. The bricks on this gable are a lot narrower. They're likely to have been made in Europe. Now, bricks are said to have come in as ballast on trading ships from the Low Countries. Walberswick was trading far and wide. The villagers wanted to show off their wealth, and what better way than to splash out on a lavish new church? And this is it, St Andrew's, and we've got a bit of a puzzle here because we've got a small church in the ruins of what was obviously a much, much larger church. The state of a church is a barometer of the fortunes of a village very often, where they're situated, what sort of condition they're in, the lavishness of the architecture. Here, this place has obviously had some kind of catastrophe. Not an earthquake, not a fire, but something else. This magnificent tower is out of all proportion with the church as it remains, and there are clues here about what's happened. Churchwarden John Simpson can help me decipher those clues. What's going on here, John?
Well, there is real evidence of 3 churches on this site. The tower was built from the early 1400s, and at that time it was abutted to a very small church. We think a wooden church. We think it was probably thatched at that time. Then the wooden church was demolished, And then this grand church was built.
And grand church it is.
Oh, and magnificent.
Ruins now, but they still give a sense of the magnificence of this
Yes,
place. Its
indeed.
presence as well.
Yes, we're very fortunate to have records from that time, church wardens' records, to explain that a contract was placed called a covenant. And I'd like to read it to you. In the 4th year of the reign of King Henry VI, a covenant was made between Richard Russell of Dunwich and Adam Powell of Blythburgh Masons on the other part. The said Richard and Adam shall make or do make a steeple joined to the church of Walberswick foresaid, with 4 buttresses and 1 room 12 foot wide and 6 foot thick the walls.
And this is making a real statement.
Oh,
isn't it?
yes, it was an amazing statement. And they worked tirelessly to build this tower. 40 years it took them, a life's work, which I still think is quite extraordinary.
But something happened, John. The grand church is no more, and you've got a smaller church.
Yes, indeed. Well, getting on for 100 years or so, the community was struggling to maintain this grand church. There wasn't the wealth anymore in the village, and they were in desperate times. Things didn't get better as the years went on, and eventually they had to make a decision to, I suppose you'd say, downsize the church. And it must have been a difficult decision to make at that time, but they managed to scrape up enough money to construct the smaller church that we have here today.
So what caused this drastic decline? It began in the 16th century with a right royal stitch-up. When King Henry VIII cut ties with the Catholic Church, he shut down the monasteries, including Blythburgh. Walberswick lost the market for its fish and local taxes from the priory. The village soon fell into debilitating poverty. Just to make things worse, fires destroyed many properties. Fortunately, thanks to the dedication of villagers, we have an excellent record of Walberswick's troubles. Local resident Pat Lancaster has been tracking down all sorts of documents. We might think that when the village starts to fall on hard times, that there's an embarrassment. It had been a wealthy place, it had been going well, and now it was going badly. Are there troubles documented?
They didn't actually hide anything. Here is an example from the Ferry Knoll, Walberswick Notes by Carol Christie of 1911, wherein she says in 1585 the parish was so poor that they sold the Great Bell for £26, 8 shillings and 9 pence. Also in 1633 there were 71 families in the place. Next year, but 54, part of the town being burnt.
It's just problem after problem. I mean, nature's conspiring against them. Then there's accidents and fires and tragedies. And then there's the economic situation. And there aren't rich families that can assist the poor anymore. And to not be able to, I mean, that was a responsibility of the parish to look after the poor people.
It would have been a responsibility of the parish, but if they didn't have any money, how could they do it? How could they cope?
At the end of the 16th century, further storms lashed the coast and the entrance to their harbour through the shingle banks silted up again. It could have signalled the end for Walberswick. In 1590, in a desperate attempt to reignite Walberswick's maritime prosperity, the villagers dug out this channel by hand to give direct access to the sea. But the problem was that ships were getting bigger and they needed deeper, safer waters than Walberswick had to offer. So during the 17th century, the village was in crisis again. There was no money to be made from the sea, and it was also a time of change in the countryside. Common land was being enclosed. This boosted the wealth of Walberswick's landowner while depriving the villagers of a place to graze their livestock. This is Westwood Lodge, which belonged to Walberswick's Lord of the Manor in the 17th century. It's a grand pile with splendid architecture in stark contrast to the poverty his villagers were living in. Historian Peter Warner has written a book about the crisis facing Walberswick at this time.
Wow, what a view, Peter.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Spectacular.
Peter has unearthed a grisly tale of murder involving locals from Walberswick and his lordship who barred their cattle from his land.
He put men with dogs down there to guard the fen. He impounded the beasts.
This was the only land they had. They weren't landowners in their own right. They had this common land, and he was robbing them of it.
Effectively, yes. The townsfolk were desperate here because they'd lost a lot of the fishing, the port wasn't working, shipbuilding was in decline, and they were very dependent on this grazing. That desperation came to a head in 1644 when one of the guards went into the village and caused a disturbance, and he was killed. And as a result of that, 4 men of Walberswick were taken to Ipswich Assizes and were hung.
Good grief. So this is people losing their lives over this dispute. It's not just about becoming a bit more wealthy for them, it's about surviving.
Yes, yes, pure and simple.
After this episode, there's no way back for the townsfolk, is there?
Economically and socially, Walberswick was crippled.
By the end of the 17th century, the village population was reduced to just 20 people. It took another 200 years for the village to get back on its feet again. This time it was made popular by Victorian photographers and artists who came here to escape the clamour of industrial progress. The Impressionist painter Philip Wilson Steer produced some of his finest work here. And architects came too. This street is one of Walberswick's biggest secrets. All these grand villas are the work of one architect, Frank Jennings. He was so enamoured with the place that he began buying plots of land and developing these individual, bespoke houses. And he did it in a very well-respected arts and crafts style, taking cues from the local architecture, the render, the plain tiles, the pan tiles, the red brick, jetties, timber, but all with a comfortable modern twist. Jennings adorned the interiors with bits and pieces he'd salvaged from medieval buildings. It's incredible. It's like a mini Great Hall. I'm getting a peep inside one he built for himself with local architect Bill Ungles, a devoted admirer of Jennings.
He would have wanted to create the medieval world in here. The fabric of this very room is that of a barn, and he's made no attempt to deceive us that it was a barn. He's left the king post roof trusses, and we can enjoy it as such, but he was first and foremost an architect. But what made him special was the sort of cocktail of components he used. That's what makes him stand out, his obsessive collecting and the incorporation of that collection into the buildings. This, of course, is what helps to make Walberswick unique.
Jennings could have built modern houses as an architect. All these new materials are coming out, and yet he's deliberately choosing to use all this old stuff.
Well, you've got to see Jennings in the context of the Industrial Revolution and how he hated that uniform character. He wanted to bring to the fore the old skills of the craftsman. He had a belief that the best ornamentation came from the original craftsmen, but there weren't the original craftsmen around in those days. This fireplace comes from the Duke of Norfolk's house, and of course they were a Catholic family, which put them at loggerheads with much of what was going on then. And we can open this secret doorway.
Oh yes, yes. So any incriminating documents could be stuffed in there and then closed back in.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. It is like a collection, this sort of juxtaposition of all these different elements. A real talking point. I can imagine when he had guests here, you know, oh, well, you know, this was the Duke of Norfolk's, and look at this, you know, isn't this marvellous? And, you know, all this sort of stuff, but he couldn't actually do it. So he'd be embarrassed.
Well, yeah. it's a secret, you see.
Yeah. There you go. Ah! How'd you do that? The house is wonderful, but I didn't expect anything quite as extraordinary as that inside. Jennings has taken a huge pride in what he's done here and in other houses that he's built. These were fashionable homes for fashionable people. And it seems he was prepared to go to extreme lengths to provide the ultimate seaside des res. And this is it. Mercer's Hall. But this building is not what it seems. It's totally out of character with the other buildings in Walberswick. It didn't even originate here. Jennings was visiting Lavenham, the ancient walled town in Suffolk, when he came across this building being dismantled. He couldn't believe such a beautiful building would be lost, so he paid £80 for it there and then. He had it dismantled and reconstructed here in Walberswick, but there was a problem. Lavenham is built on a hill, its streets slope. Here he had flat land to work with, so he's compensated. And you can see how the brickwork allows the building to be levelled up. It's all on the slant. Even today, Walberswick is a place where you can forget the modern world. But it remains a working village. Writers and artists still live here. Painter Jo Lowry gets her inspiration from the history of the village and its relationship with the ever-changing sea and sky.
I just came and I just felt so right. I just felt for the first time in my life I was in the right place. I've done a lot of sea paintings, but I think my love is really just the sky, and because it's very affected by the water below, that's what attracted me to Walberswick.
Do you get a sense of the history of the place?
You go down to the harbour and you're aware of all the excitement and energy that had gone, well, for me anyway, and I'm sure I'm speaking for others, that existed before when it was a working village.
There's a real paradox here because you're painting solitude and this wild landscape, and yet people flock here in their thousands to enjoy it.
They do. And
how do those two things square up?
I think they work because the people that come in. Now, I'm not sure about the day trippers, but the people that come year after year with their families. You talk to them, they've all been here as children. They've been brought here on holiday, and they're now bringing their families back, and they all love the place. It engenders such happiness.
The villagers of Walberswick know that the sea might yet have the last laugh, but they don't let that affect their everyday lives. They've faced adversity before, and I'm sure whatever the future holds, they'll adapt to what comes their way.